Активные мероприятия, говорите? Будущее покажет. Добро пожаловать на виртуальный саммит UpCode.
Okay, you're on.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. It's exciting to have this sort of virtual platform. But yeah, so a much lighter topic, nothing about disinformation and Russia, but I was also a student at Johns Hopkins and worked for them for a while, so maybe that's my ties to Thomas. But this is instead that feeling when you get really excited, you patch diff to 0-day used in the wild, but then find out it's the wrong volt. So as I said, my name is Maddie Stone, and I'm a security researcher on Google's Project Zero team. And I've been focusing on 0 days used in the wild. So let's back up. And there's a story associated with this in the blog post that Matt alluded to before. So as I said, I'm interested in 0 days in the wild, and a big aspect of 0 days is towards Windows. And I came and joined this team having plenty of reverse engineering experience, but no Windows development, no Windows vulnerability research, no Windows reverse engineering. So when come December 2019, when Microsoft Patch Tuesday said, hey, here's a new vulnerability that, yes, has been seen actively exploited in the wild, I thought that would be a really great opportunity for me to dig in, get some experience, and share information with our community about the vulnerability and do some variant analysis. So I get through it, I'm working, I'm patch diffing, I'm making progress. I create a crash proof of concept or POC, and we're so excited. I write up a blog post. It goes through our internal reviews. And 24 hours before our publish date, we share with Microsoft as a heads up. About 10 minutes after it's shared, we get the email back. Maddie reversed the wrong volt. You reversed CVE 2019-1433, not CVE 2019-1458. So this is the story of my process of going in, patch diffing this, what I learned from a process, and even though it didn't turn out to be the vulnerability I intended to reverse engineer, it still ended up being a pretty cool bug, I think. And I always learn from people talking about how they choose to write POCs for vulns, as well as how they find them. So hopefully it's of interest to you too. But backing up, I said I'm really interested in 0 days that are exploited in the wild. If you know about Project Zero, you might know that our mission is make 0 day hard. And usually for the last 5 years, that's taken we've done that through vulnerability research, trying to find bugs in consumer products and getting them patched, usually on the same targets that, actors who want to exploit them are looking at. So when Ben brought me onto the team last July, my role was going to be taking a little bit of a different perspective of making 0 day hard. I was going to instead combine vulnerability research expertise with sort of threat intel. Because every time a 0 day that's been exploited in the wild is detected, that's the failure case for the actors behind it. They're not trying to get caught with their 0 day exploits. So if we can use that expertise from Project Zero's team in exploit development, vulnerability research to really analyze how that exploit works, interesting details about the vulnerability, then maybe we can make 0 days that much more harder by learning what our actors doing for real. So far, this has taken 3 different sort of prongs or main approaches. One is root cause analysis. One of the things that I notice when you really look at a lot of things that are published about 0 days right now is it often focuses on like the exploit or the payload. Whereas I'm more interested, and our team is more interested in what is the vulnerability and how did they exploit to get in the first place. So we want to do a root cause analysis to make sure there are all the details about that vulnerability, where we can try to assess how do they find it. Was it through manual review? Was it through fuzzing? What type of techniques are they using? And how are they exploiting it? What is their exploit methodology? Is it using known exploit methodologies that we've seen for years? Or did they create a whole new novel way to exploit this? And then another important approach is after you have that root cause analysis, performing variant analysis on it. Because even in Project Zero, when you usually find a bug, there's usually a couple more you find at the same time. It's usually not only discovering a single one. And if the actors that are using those bugs and exploiting them already have the full details about the vulnerability they're exploiting, then they have a leg up on having those variants already that they can plug and play into their exploit. So we should be doing the same thing to try and burn as many of those bugs as we can to make it that much harder for them to redeploy their exploit. And lastly, all of this information can come together to help brainstorm, come together and come up with new ways to detect 0 days. Because obviously it's incredibly difficult. You don't know, because that's sort of the whole point of 0-day exploitation. But if we've analyzed what are their exploitation methodologies, how are they finding bugs, how are they using the bugs, then maybe when that information is shared, we as a whole security community can come together with the differing tools we have, the different telemetry, just different ideas and brains and the approach we bring to security to then find ways to make it that much more harder for people to be exploited. Because, the whole thing about 0-day exploits is they're usually used, and they harm someone. They put someone at risk. And so we want to try and stop that. So that's why I care about this work and why I'm doing it. And I think this sort of example is also going to show why sharing is really our only path forward for all of this. And it's part of the reason why I got it wrong in the first place. So let's go back to the second Tuesday of December 2019, Patch Tuesday. We open up the Microsoft Security Advisory, and there it is, CVE 2019-1458, a Win32k Escalation of Privilege with the notation, has it been exploited in the wild? Yes. So what are some details about this vulnerability? As I said, it's a Win32k it's a Win32k Escalation of Privilege. And Win32k is one of the core components of the Windows kernel, the Windows operating system. And so on the same day as Patch Tuesday, Kaspersky, Anton, Ivanov, and Alexey Kulaev published a blog post about this because they were the original discoverers of the exploit. And what we learned from their blog was that it is a part of a chain that was used with a Google Chrome 0-day as well. It was obviously actively exploited in the wild. And one of the reasons why it was so interesting to me, and I thought this would be a great bug to dive into, is that it affected both Windows 7 as well as some versions of Windows 10. Last year, if we look at all of the Windows 0 days that were detected as exploited in the wild, most of them were Windows 7. So I thought this one might be more I could learn more from, since it also affected some versions of Windows 10. And the blog post didn't provide a lot of full details about the vulnerability. There was some information about the exploit, but you really couldn't figure out exactly what the vulnerability was solely based on the blog post. But one of the key points stood out. The vulnerability itself is related to Windows switching functionality, for example, the one triggered using the Alt-Tab key combination. So this is one of the main details I had to go off of when trying to create the root cause analysis for the vul. So let's get into it. But first, I need to think about how we're going to do it. So I personally don't have access to Windows source code, so that that means no source code auditing, no source code patch diffing, and I also couldn't find a copy of the exploit. I worked to reach out to people for a few, I think about a week and a half, and never quite got it. So that left me with one option: binary patch diffing. Last fall, I did a presentation where I analyzed some of the different binary diffing tools. It was called like What's Up with WhatsApp. So if you're interested in my analysis of different bin diffing tools, go ahead and check that out. But based on that, what I found was bin diff partnered with IDA Pro worked best out of the box for me. And so I also decided, based on guidance from James Forshaw, the Windows expert on our team, or one of them, he gave me the suggestion that I should work on patch dipping Windows 7 first rather than Windows 10. And once I understand the vulnerability, then I could move over to Windows 10. And his reasoning for this is that first, the signal to noise ratio is going to be much higher for Windows 7 rather than Windows 10 because the noise includes things like control flow guard. They have more inline instrumentation calls and weirder, that was his word, weirder compiler settings that can just make it harder to reverse engineer in Windows 10. Also, in Windows 10, Win32k is broken up into a couple of different files rather than on Windows 7. The whole driver is a single file. So I got to it. I ended up patch diffing September 2019 versus December 2019. Looking back, this seems crazy, but the reason why I did this and it would ultimately lead to my downfall was that I thought maybe there weren't October and November patches for Windows 7. And the reason is this is probably my first time using Windows in a decade. I'm setting up my VMs to begin doing this work, and I need to apply all of the patches to Windows 7. And when I finally get up to September 2019, the Windows update mechanism only gives me an option to update to December from there. There's no October or November. And so I thought maybe since Windows 7 is so close to end of life, that maybe they just didn't have the monthly patches for October and November. And so I thought that the last available patch for Windows 7 Win32k, or Windows 7 in general, was September 2019. So that was why I ended up doing it from September to December instead of November to December. Oh yeah, oops, there it is. So I load these two into IDA Pro, bin diffing, and there were 23 functions which had been modified between September and December. And this seemed like very promising because 23 functions, that's a small enough number that I could even go through every single one of them. The reason why there's no symbols for this screenshot is it took me actually about 5 to 7 days until I realized that there was a thing called the Microsoft Symbols server where I could actually get symbols for this. So I had a couple of false starts thinking I had the correct vulnerability, the correct change, and then realizing it wasn't quite that. It's documented in the blog post if you're interested in seeing how this process came about. But ultimately, I ended up deciding on a new approach, which was draw switch wind highlight is one of the functions that was discussed in Kaspersky's blog post. Draw switch wind highlight had no changes from September to December in the patches. There's no changes at all, meaning it wasn't patched to fix this vulnerability. So instead, I started working back up its control flow graph to see if any of the other functions within its control flow graph had been patched. And that's when I found that X window had. So once I got the symbol server up and running and integrated into IDA, the bin diff output became much more readable. And so the three functions that ended up being the vulnerability changes that I analyzed were XXX next window, destroy queue, and key event. And so there's obviously a few more steps in my patch diffing process, but this is a 30-minute talk. So if you're interested in the patch diffing whole process, please feel free to read the blog post. But let's now chat about what I analyzed, what I had thought was 1458, but turned out to be 1433, and get into the root cause analysis, because I still think it was a pretty cool bug, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So what is CVE 2019-1433? The first thing is that this function, XXX next window, can also only be triggered by a certain type of task switching window. You remember that was one of the details we knew about 1458 from the Kaspersky blog post. But what the root cause vulnerability for this one is the use after free of a tag queue object in this function. And the free is in a conventional way of common Windows bug classes in the kernel that we can see documentation for going back to before 2010. So this object is freed during a user mode callback. So what happens is the function key event calls next window, and it calls it with a pointer to the tag queue object as the first argument. But the key event nor next window never lock it to protect it during user mode callbacks. And the XXX in each of these function names mean that they have a user mode callback within the function. And so that's supposed to be sort of a signal that, hey, you should probably be locking your objects here. So what ends up happening is next window calls move switch wind highlight which has the user mode callback. And once it returns, next window uses the pointer to the tag cube object without any verification, and that's what causes our use after free. So super, super dense, but let's have some fun with it. So I have this idea. I think this is what the root cause is. How do we write a crash POC or proof of concept for it? The 3 steps we got to do is we got to find a way to trigger XXX next window. Then we got to find a way to free the tag cube structure. And then we have to figure out how we can make sure we use that freed structure. So first, triggering next window. When you usually try to trigger a task switch window in Windows, you might press Alt-Tab or Control-Alt-Tab if you want it to be sticky. That doesn't trigger next window. The way to trigger it is this crazy keystrokes that I figured out. And I only figured out how to do it programmatically with these key codes. Keyboard in, but if you're doing an exploit, you're not really trying to do it based on a keyboard, you're trying to do it programmatically anyways. So the combination is Alt extended tab, release that tab, click Alt, regular, Control, tab, release all of them except the Alt extended and click tab again, and that will then trigger your XXX next window call. So these are the 2 different task switch windows. The top one is probably the normal one you've seen on Windows 7, and that is what it will not call next window, but it's what happens if you do Alt-Tab Control or just Alt-Tab. The task switch window that is displayed when we can trigger next window with that crazy combination of keystrokes looks like the one below instead. So this is a highly condensed, in order to fit on a slide, example of the decompiled code for next window. So here we see that the first argument in is our tag cube struct, and then we see here at the bottom under label 106, we then use that struct, and that we can find a way within this infinite while loop starting up here that ends down here, and I had to do the dots. And oh, I see the clicking noise is my mechanical keyboard. Sorry, I just noticed the little chat on the YouTube thing. But so I shouldn't have looked. It caught it out of the corner of my eye. But so if we, there's that oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, y'all. Let's see if this helps. So we leave the while loop, and what can comes directly to this place where we have the queue being dereferenced and used. And so this is where we do our user mode callback within move switch win highlight, which is where we will end up deleting the tag queue. So to free the queue, as I said, we're going to do it within the user mode callback within move switch win highlight. And there are a few different options we have available within that function, but we need one which will reliably return to our POC code, meaning that when it sends a message to user mode, our piece or proof of concept can expect to receive it. And so that's how I decided to send message timeout within draw switch win the highlight, because it is sending a message to whatever window is being highlighted in that task switch window. So whichever one they're going to next draw that little blue square around as you're switching through the different tasks, that's who receives it. So if in our POC we create a bunch of windows, then they're going to have to send the message to us to highlight our window. So the message that's being sent is 8C or WMLPK draw switch wind. And this is one of the undocumented messages in the Windows kernel. So Windows doesn't expect user apps to respond to this message. Instead, they automatically dispatch a call to user32 function here to respond to it. So in order to make it so we can respond to it, we need to hot patch the kernel callback table. And so this is the code to doing this, and this was published actually by Jiru or Mateusz from our team back in 2010. So this is the code that I use. So I looked up the entry in the kernel callback table and then overrode it down here at the bottom with callback hook, which is one of the functions I put in my POC. So in our callback, we need to be able to free the tag. We need to be able to free the tag queue object. And so to do that, the best option I found was to use the API called attach thread input. Because attach thread input, what it says in the documentation is it attaches the input processing mechanism of one thread to that of another thread. And so to do that, it destroys the queue of the thread that's being attached to another's because it's just going to use the other ones. And so that's how we end up freeing our queue within our callback. The other step we need to do within our callback is we want to be able to force the execution back in that next window function to go to the code, the label 106, where they are using the for each structure. So there was a few different things we had to do in order to force that execution flow. So if this is where we are when we return from our callback in our POC, then we need to ensure that that handle of the next window to highlight that's being returned from move switch window highlight will return 0 whenever it's passed to handle no secure. And so the window that's being passed, the handle, is whichever one is being highlighted. And so to do that, we destroy our window, because then invalidate handle no secure will return 0, which will force us to go back to the top of this while loop. Once we're back at the top of the while loop, then we need to make sure that we can fail one of these top checks at the top of the if statement, because we want to get back to label 106 because that's where we have the use after free. So quite a few of these we can't control. Our FNID is always going to be 2A0 because of the type of it's a task switch window, and we can't change some of these other aspects too. However, the be destroyed flag tells us is set to 1 whenever the alt tab switch window has been destroyed. So that's what we do next, is we can force ourselves into the else statement that's in the second box, where we will set B45 equals to 0 and then force us to jump down to label 106 if we destroy the task switch window within our callback. Jump ahead. So this is our callback, lots of code here, where we cover the 3 different things we just talked about. So up here, we're freeing the tag queue object. Here, we're destroying the window that would be passed back through move switch wind highlight. And here, we're finding the alt tab or the task switcher window and then sending it the destroy message so that that be destroyed flag will equal 1 and allow us to jump down to where we use the tag queue struct. And lastly, once we make it to label 106, we dereference the pointer to the tag object and access one of the members of the queue. And so we can see in the instruction that is at that address, we are dereferencing the pointer to tag queue and getting one of its members, and then we go on to use R14. So that is how you write a crash POC for the wrong bug that I was trying to analyze, but I still thought it was a really interesting way to dive into Win32k internals and different ways of exploiting them, and really sort of learning a lot about the previous research of Windows kernel exploitation and building those pieces together. So a few closing thoughts on that. One, it took me approximately 3. Oh.
I thought you were waiting for questions. Just go ahead.
Oh, okay. So it took me about 3 weeks to set up a test environment, diff the patches, and create a crash POC. Although I did patch diff the wrong bug than what I was intending, if we are a attacker or an actor who is looking to exploit 1 days or n days within Windows, then that's a pretty short timeline, because you're not looking necessarily for a specific bug, but rather any bug that you can exploit. And since I had zero Windows knowledge to begin with, we can generally consider these 3 work weeks probably a high upper bound for the time it takes to patch diff and have a working POC for vulnerabilities and things. And I think that's an important thing for us to continue to discuss, because there is a lot of vulnerability disclosure debate also that you need to let patches sit and to sort of have an uptake before you discuss what the vulnerabilities are that they're patching. But those who are looking to patch diff will have that information likely quicker than anyone else if we don't share that information. Another thought is we really do need to all work together to share as much information as we can whenever 0 days that are exploited in the wild are discovered, because we need to learn from them. We need to come up with detections. We need to find the variants, and we need to, think about different ways to detect future ones as well. And that can only come from us sharing the information and capitalizing on each other's strengths to really use those exploits as much as we can to raise the bar and require that much more investment from the side of those who are looking to do the exploiting or the attacking. Lastly, if you're interested in getting involved in Windows, these are all of the resources I use that help teach me a lot of the different pieces that I put together to do this. So highly recommend. And lastly, what I do differently if I didn't want to patch diff the wrong one is I would have used November 2019. So what I didn't realize is there's another Microsoft update server where sometimes you can find additional updates that won't be shown just by the Windows update mechanism. And there I found October and November, not just September. And so if you patched diff November 2019 to December 2019, there's only 5 functions that were changed, not including 1433, which had been patched in October, not December. If you want more about this, please go read Kaspersky's blog post on it. And they also, at SAS at Home last week, did a talk called 0 Day Exploits of Operation Wizard Opium, where they got into some of the details about this vulnerability. Also, Floric_PL on Twitter published the real root cause analysis for 1458, which is quite interesting as well. So I'd point you there. I have a full blog post in the Crash POC, as well as we at Project Zero are trying to track in the spreadsheet all the 0 days we know of being exploited in the wild. And with that, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Maddie. It was very cool. The Win32k talks are always very interesting. I guess if Dave Weston is watching, we can ask him when are they gonna if they are planning to rewrite the driver in Rust or not. If it was just because the amount of vulnerabilities in that driver has been pretty crazy. I remember at some point when there are so many rest conditions, it was just crazy. That's so many of them.
They've also done a lot of work to lock down exploitation of Windows 32k. So that's why we're not seeing as many affecting Windows 10. And this one still only affected a few versions of Windows 10, not the most recent ones.
Okay. Actually, null pointer difference was a huge problem. Actually, I remember for that driver. Side question before I jump onto the questions from the chat. Are you planning to look at the DirectX driver, or is it on your to-do list since you started to look at Win32k and you got your first introduction to Windows in 10 years, if I quote you correctly?
It's not specifically on my to-do list right now because I'm sort of focusing any of my work based on 0 days we find exploited in the wild. And so for 2020, there's already been quite a few, especially in browsers. So I've been looking at those as well and sort of just trying to follow and publish information. We're hoping to start publishing all of our root cause analysis for each of these 0 days in the next month or two. Okay.
Yeah, it was an excellent blog post, by the way. I really like how it was written. So question from Dave Ethel. Let me retrieve it. Oh, I just lost it. People have been talking too much. Did you remove the question? Oh, yeah. How do we know the original vuln finder found that bug? Further versus manual analysis.
I don't, for which bug, the wrong bug or the correct bug, 1433 or 1458?
A good question, actually. Yeah, actually, good question.
So,
Like, by the time he replies, he hears that. I guess we can ask him about it. Also, he also asked how much harder is it to go all the way to a local privilege escalation?
I think you would be able to. I didn't do it. I think the way the CrashPoc was working, I think for someone who has more exploitation experience for Windows than me, I think the way they are using the use after free wouldn't be that difficult to take it to a local privilege escalation. But I did not go through the steps to do that.
Okay. He's saying he was talking about the wrong bug. Did they not have that bug?
Oh, the 1433, the one that wasn't exploited in the wild. I didn't check who actually had reported that to Microsoft, but I'm guessing it feels like it could have either been a fuzzer, with ASAN or something similar to that, just because of the crazy number of keystrokes to even trigger next window. But yeah, since it wasn't exploited in the wild too, not as sure and didn't focus as much then on that piece of it, but I would guess likely a fuzzer and an address sanitizer type of tool.
Yeah, because I mentioned it only because that was one of the original motivations for this effort.
Yes.
Question mark. Okay.
Yes, and 100%.
Okay. And I think I saw like some comment about, and I saw it in your references, about Wizard Opium. Is it an operation from Wizard Opium, or is it unrelated to the bugs you were showing?
So 1433 is not related to Wizard Opium, the bug I did a root cause analysis on, because that was the mistaken one that I thought was originally 1458, which Kaspersky said was exploited as a part of Operation Wizard Opium. So the intended bug I did not analyze has been associated with Operation Wizard Opium. The one I actually analyzed has not been exploited in the wild or associated with any group.
Okay. And another question, actually, coming from a Linux FreeBSD exploitation background, what are good resources on jumping towards the Windows side? Because I guess not everyone has James Forshaw as a coworker,
But so I would suggest reading the resources, and that would specifically be Windows 32k things. And I think my blog post talks also about how I set up my environment, so using WinDebug in IDA and using the symbol server. And so I also did a Twitter thread a few weeks ago about talks that are at least 7 or 8 years old. And through that, there was a lot of really great Windows research and explanations that came up that I still think are extremely valuable if you want to get started into the research today.
Yeah, because that must be, well, I guess like most of it is quite similar in a way. I guess most of the difference was probably with the tooling, right?
It's not even as much the tooling as I think it's you don't see as many of those intros and the basics published today, because I think a lot of people say, oh, it's already been done. So going back to, 7, 10 plus year old talks and presentations is where I found a lot of those basics of security research that then the talks that are coming out today made more sense to me, because they were, referencing or building on all this previous research, But if I didn't go back and see that previous research, I wouldn't have really understood or been able to follow of how do I even get started.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's pretty cool. I don't think we have more questions. Well, thanks again for accepting to speak, and it's a pretty good presentation. And again, like congratulations on the blog post. Like it's really well written. Like it's I can tell there's a lot of work that went behind it. And every time I see like really nice blog posts like that, makes me happy, because like sometimes people don't spend much effort in writing the blog post, and when there is some good like blog post, that's very enjoyable to read,
Cool. And thank y'all for having me. And sorry about whatever noise is going on. I'm learning how to do this virtual thing.
That's all right. But actually, you know what? Like I was thinking, maybe I will try it next time. But there is like this RTX feature with the NVIDIA cards that we can use to do like noise reduction. Because in theory, in Zoom, like you have like one layer of noise reduction, but then the NVIDIA thing is like using the GPU. So I will see if I can just do it automatically for like the guest. Yeah, I guess probably like I'm gonna be using like more AI for like that YouTube show than for like security tools, But yeah, cool. Thanks again.
Thank you.